Now, hopefully you've already been able to take a look at our own Alex Caruso's running back video. Walking through each phase of the draft, looking for running backs that should be of value to you. And I'm going to try and do the exact same thing this week. But instead of looking at the running back position, let's go ahead and take a look at the guys under center. The quarterback position, slightly undervalued overall, but let's see if we can go through each phase of the draft, like early, middle, late, and find some of the guys that you should be targeting for right now, like on Underdog Fantasy right now in those best ball drafts in this week's episode of By the Numbers. So let's go ahead and take a look at, we've got the guys going in the early, the first 6-ish rounds, like the early part. We've got round 7 through 12, the middle phase, and then all the way to the 18th round in the later rounds. And I'll just try and find at least a guy that I've been targeting and a guy that you should be targeting as well, just based off their ADP, based on their 2022 outlook, the fact that they can possibly beat their ADP, so on and so forth. There should be values to you based off that. Now, depending on your draft strategy, that could change whether or not you're going to be targeting them, because our early round decisions can wind up affecting if we should be targeting a quarterback late or early or whatever the case may be. But let's go ahead and start off in the early rounds. First 6 picks. Who should we be targeting right now? And a guy that I'm looking at in terms of making a bounce back play in fantasy football for the 2022 season is Lamar Jackson. Now, I know everybody's on Justin Herbert. Some folks are still clinging to Patrick Mahomes, and I completely understand why some folks would have that particular inclination. But Lamar Jackson, for me, just looking at what happened last year, and also let's look at his 2020 season as well. Because in 2020, top 10 metrics across the board. Ravens were top 10 EPA per play. They were top 10 in total points scored per game. Lamar himself, as a quarterback, as a passer, top 10 in EPA per play, top 10 in quarterback scoring in fantasy. All those things. Now, this was a part of the Ravens, or this was when the Ravens offense was still relying on that power run scheme. They were 30th in neutral passing rate, on early downs. So in 2021, they go to 12th in neutral passing rate, but let's also contextualize the things that were also happening around him at that same time. It's not just the fact that they introduced more passing into their offense, but by week 16, the second time they played against the Cincinnati Bengals, even though they got blown out the first time. I loved the contest. I loved watching that game, don't get me wrong. But by that point, they had 14 players on injury reserve at that point, and they had an additional 5 players ruled out for that particular game. Lamar Jackson himself was also ruled out for that game. Devin Duvernay, who's now going to be a larger part of that offense, ruled out. 2 starting offensive linemen, or at least 1 starting offensive lineman and 1 rotational lineman as well. So they were just completely plagued by injuries throughout the 2021 season. So, with all those things going on around him, you would think that he would just have taken a complete step back as a passer. Well, in the fantasy sense, absolutely, but not really as a passer himself. If you look at, again, by the numbers, looking at his metrics from a completion percentage over expected perspective, he was still top 7, top 8 in CPOE amongst his peers. This is through the first 10 weeks of the season before he started to miss games. The injuries continued to pile up. But at the beginning of the season, through almost half the season, he was still an accurate passer. He was still capable of generating an offense that we would want to invest in from a fantasy perspective. But like I mentioned beforehand, it was the injuries. It was all these other things that they had to deal with that made that impossible for us to continue to do that. But again, still, despite all that, it's still up there, just outside the top 12 in EPA per play, for the entire 2021 season. So if we now can at least think through this idea that most of the players are going to come back healthy this week, this season. Not just the running backs and J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards. We've got most of their starting offensive line returning. They also invested. They have depth at that particular unit as well along their offensive line. Their defense is now returning back primarily healthy as well. They can play the style of offense that they want to play. Now, of course, I do have some concerns about their pass catchers, of course. Marquise Brown now in Arizona, and now they're essentially relying on second-year Rashad Bateman, who only played, let's say, essentially half the season. I am excited for him, but really, if we're looking at Rashad Bateman, Mark Andrews, but then a combination of Devin Duvernay, James Prochet, of course, I understand why folks would be hesitant to draft him or compare him to the other early round quarterbacks, because You can see so much more upside with a guy like Justin Herbert. You can see much more upside with a guy like even Jalen Hurts, who's like kind of taken in the back end of the early rounds as well. But again, this is still a quarterback that was capable of being like a unanimous MVP player, like not an MVP quarterback just a couple seasons ago. Even if they do fall back to a more power run scheme here in 2022, the passing volume should still be there. And as I outlined beforehand, like this is still a quarterback capable of generating a functional and efficient offense. Like now that he has at least more reliable pass catchers and a more reliable offensive line to work behind. So Lamar Jackson in the early round, that's the guy for me. So now let's go ahead and move into the middle rounds. Rounds 7 through 12. A guy that I'm trying to target, or at least I'm looking for, like if I possibly can, is Derek Carr. And with Derek Carr, I think it's the reductive reasoning would be that, well, they added Davante Adams. He's one of the best like wide receivers still in the game, even at this part of Davante Adams' career. So of course now we want to go ahead and crown Derek Carr being the beneficiary of that. But it's not, to me, it's not just that simple. I think one of the easiest things to look at is Derek Carr as being a so-so quarterback like throughout most of his career. But did y'all know last year he was 5th in passing yards? He's 12th. Top 12 also in adjusted yards per attempt. That's amongst all quarterbacks like last season. But the biggest thing and the biggest problem for Derek Carr that's been his reason for not being a productive fantasy quarterback is his touchdown rate. Like he was 24th in touchdown rate last year. His touchdown interception ratio, which isn't a really sticky thing, but it's also been one of the things that has dragged him down year over year. And so part of the problem is that he's been inefficient, like in the red zone. Again, by the numbers, I'm looking at his EPA per play or EPA per attempt once they get into the red zone. He was towards the back end of the league. And now if you look at like the guy that I'm comparing to, or the other face that you see on this chart is Mac Jones, because who is now the head coach for the Las Vegas Raiders? It's going to be Josh McDaniels. The coach that was capable of making Mac Jones efficient like in such a short span of time throughout this rookie season. Mac Jones, despite the fact that he had 3 attempts in that Buffalo game, New England was towards the back end of the league in terms of neutral passing rate on early downs. He still was capable of putting together a passing offense featuring Hunter Henry, Kendrick Bourne, Jacoby Myers. There were so many other, lesser pass catchers like on that offense. And now, on top of the fact that Derek Carr gets Josh McDaniels, of course he gets Davante Adams, but he already has efficient pass catchers that are along with him. Hunter Renfrow last year, top 10 in terms of EPA per play once they got into the red zone. Darren Waller, when he was healthy, top 6 amongst all tight ends. So he already has the core pieces there. You add a guy like Davante Adams, and I think the 3 of them combined along with Josh McDaniels will wind up pulling a guy like Derek Carr into, let's say, the top 10 contention to beat out that ADP, the QB14 ADP that it currently has there on Underdog Fantasy. So another guy in the middle rounds that I'm definitely targeting. And my last guy for y'all today, a little bit longer video, but hopefully you're hanging with me so far, and I really do appreciate it. But Matt Ryan in the later rounds. Looking at what they had last year, think about the wide receivers that were starting for the Falcons towards the back end of the season. In December, these are the wide receivers starting for the Atlanta Falcons: Tajay Sharp, Russell Gage, and Olamide Zaccheaus. There's a completely unserious offense, which, again, I apologize to Atlanta Falcons fans, but you guys have to agree with me here at this point. It's difficult to say, other than outside of Kyle Pitts, like what they really had going for them at that point. So, but good vibes going down in Atlanta right now with Drake London, so on and so forth. But let's, again, concentrate on Matt Ryan. He now goes to an offense that was 13th worst in adjusted sack rate to 13th best from last year. And the Colts also have provided a little bit additional depth along their offensive line. And he also gets an upgrade in wide receiver. The names I just listed off for the Falcons, he now goes to one of the one of the wide receivers that we're most excited about for 2022 in terms of Michael Pittman, whom, if you've read any of the work conducted by Matt Harmon over at Reception Perception, he's super excited. Like, for a guy that now going into his 4th season, he was top of the wide receiver class in terms of, being able to beat man and press coverage. 79th, 96th percentile against both of those. If you want to also talk about the other pass catchers involved, they've been talking about Nyheim Hines for a while. We can even look at a prospect like Alec Pierce from my alma mater, University of Cincinnati. Paris Campbell as well kicking around. So it's just that entire offense now gets a boost from a guy that had one of their quarterback from last year had the 3rd worst completion percentage over expected in Carson Wentz. They now get a stable or stability at the quarterback position in Matt Ryan now. So if you're looking for a quarterback late, Matt Ryan last year, 4 games with 300 yards and like multiple passing touchdowns with that group, and now he gets this crew to work with. Another good target there for you to take a look at in Underdog Fantasy right now. So there you have it. 3 quarterbacks that I am targeting and trying to aggressively target, like in Underdog Fantasy drafts right now. So go ahead and hop on into those lobbies. Hop into the BBM3, hop into the puppy because the Super Flex is going on right now. See if you can pick up those guys, but let us know over here at Football Guys any other types of content, any other player analysis that you're looking for. Appreciate you all for checking out the video. Like, subscribe, do all those great things for not just myself but the other analysts here at FBG. I appreciate y'all. Be safe, and I'll catch y'all next week. Peace.